I'm filmmaker and musician Alicia J. Rose, and this is the Menopunks Podcast. Who am I? I'm a director, photographer, musician, living in Portland, Oregon, and I am making the feature documentary film Menopunks. But you know what? People need to know what's going on now with menopause and HRT and everything else in the menosphere. So I thought a podcast will do it. So here you are. You're now listening to the podcast called Menopunks, just like the movie Menopunks, a misinformation shattering feature documentary about perimenopause and menopause and the creative process as seen through the lens of defiant Gen X indie musicians, trailblazing female doctors, and very opinionated celebrity icons. Can't wait to share with you everything I'm learning along the way of making this movie, and also have new conversations with all kinds of different people, deep diving into all the places in the metaverse that I think need spelunking. So strap in and enjoy the Menopunks Podcast. Well, hello. Welcome to Menopunks Podcast, Aoife O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Alicia. Lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, you had to be the very first guest on this podcast because, well, A, I'm a little bit obsessed with you. You know, you are the reason I have become completely hormonally radicalized. And two, you have your own wonderful podcast called The Dusty Muffins that I'm a huge fan of. And I just, of course, I want to slither onto that sometime. But I think having you here as Menopunk's very first podcast guest it's perfect because really you were my gateway drug into the menosphere. So can you tell the Menopunks out there a little bit about who you are and how you come to this space?
Yeah, I am originally from Ireland. I'm a primary care doctor. So in Ireland, that's called a GP. So I went to medical school in Ireland and did my family medicine residency there, and then moved over to the US in 2004 and had to do another residency because at that time they didn't recognize any training done outside the US.
Right, so that was basically fun. Double it up.
Yeah, so I did that at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And I have done work in different areas of primary care. So I've done a lot of gender affirming care. I worked in the emergency room for a long time, and then a lot of general medical primary care clinic. So that's kind of where I had centered most of my care before I learned all about neuroendocrine hormones that come from the ovaries.
Whoops.
And once I learned all about those, I did a 180 and just delved into that. I feel like once the veil has been pulled back, you can't unsee it.
I know. I feel like we're in this age of sort of veil ripping. You see people for who they are. And also, if you can reveal the truth behind the disinformation, right? Once one veil goes down, they all go down on some level. And it's really scary and kind of wonderful. But tell us how I feel like that's related to sort of the metaverse, as it were, the menosphere. I'm going to keep saying meta things because it's just so much fun. But I'd love to know, or I'd love for you to share with our peeps kind of what got you into being, on such sort of a mission with menopause and perimenopause, but also what led you into the sort of online zone, because you're really a burgeoning influencer on some level, or whatever that means in the doctor verse. I'm so many verses in this podcast, but I'd love to know sort of what brought you there and how people can find you and like what your purview is specifically with menopause and perimenopause.
Well, amazingly, I had gone through being a doctor for over 20 something years before I knew anything about perimenopause. My training was very basic, like other doctors, when it came to menopause. And, basically it was taught your periods stop. It's a wonderful thing. You get a few hot flashes, maybe some vaginal dryness, and then life is wonderful.
That's it, huh?
It turns out that is not 100% accurate. For many years, I felt like I was dying. I really, really thought I was very, very ill. I'm obviously not a great patient because I didn't go really looking for help. But I did in a way, like I went, and I see this in my patients too in primary care. I went from a woman who saw her doctor every few years for a pap smear to someone who was there on her doorstep every few months with another injury. Another
You became that woman, you mean?
Yeah, I became that woman, yeah. So I had plantar fasciitis, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow. Don't play either of those sports at the moment.
How many elbows do you have?
Just frozen shoulder. I tore my shoulder. All these things. My body was just falling apart, and I had no idea why. I was a very active person, but not in such a sense that I should get injured. You know, there was one year where I broke 4 toes in 3 separate incidents.
What?
So I was in a walking boot for practically a year. I would just break a toe, it would heal in 6 weeks, and then I'd be back in the walking boot with another toe.
Oh, God.
My brain
Literally
couldn't
falling
tell
apart.
where I was in space. Yeah, it really affected my brain. And I remember being at my doctor's office and crying and telling her, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I can see an advertisement on the television for a banana, and that will make me cry. And I said, I've been treating women with depression my whole career, and this is not depression. I don't know what this is. I don't know how to explain it to you, but I know it's not depression. And I had no history of anxiety or depression or anything. And I think if anything's going to cause anxiety or depression, medical school and 2 residencies are a good test for that, you know?
Litmus test for misery.
Yeah. So, you know, I left her office with an antidepressant.
Oh, God.
And I got to the point where my husband's an oncologist, and I got to the point where I just thought I have some terminal cancer and I just need to go find out what that is, which cancer it is, and just get it treated. That's what I thought I had. And I thought probably a brain tumor because of all the brain symptoms I was having. And I remember lying on the couch one day, and my phone, I was on Instagram, and I started getting sent these reels from Dr. Louise Newson and Dr. Heather Hirsch. They were the first 2 for me.
Snaps.
And some of it filtered through, and I remember a moment lying on the couch, like I had gone from a really active person to someone who would make breakfast for their family, go and lie on the couch. Would make lunch for their family, go and lie on the couch. You know, I had no energy.
Wow.
And some of this started to filter through, and I thought, Jesus, could this possibly be what I have? I mean, it was every single symptom. You know, I couldn't even remember the code. You know, when it says we'll send you a 4-digit code to get into your account, and you look at it on the phone, it's like 4222. And then you go back and you're like, I don't know what the hell that code was. Like, I couldn't remember it for 30 seconds. So, that was when that was when it all started for me. And the first thing I did was I went to Louise Newson's website and I read everything I could about it. And it turned out she had a free course for doctors, which now she has a charge for. It's like 100 sterling pounds, you know, which is maybe $120, something like that. And after that, I just couldn't get enough. And then I did the Heather Hirsch provider course, which was just life-changing. Those 2 courses changed my life. They changed my health, and they changed my whole career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So isn't it interesting how most women who start going through perimenopause, don't really even know they're going through it, but also are convinced that they're dying. Because, like, I swear to God, most of the people I've talked to, including myself, because we couldn't figure out what was going on, we really felt like we were dying.
Yeah.
Why? I mean,
it genuinely feels like that. It feels like you're dying. As I've heard so many of my patients say, the color goes out of your life. I heard Louise Newson say that she didn't even not that she didn't love her children, but she wasn't feeling that love. Like you can't even appreciate what you have. You're just in a hole, it feels like, numb. It's the most horrible feeling.
So I feel like, imagine that feeling, right? Times how many women are in perimenopause and menopause at this moment, do you think? Just give me a ballpark number.
Oh, probably, what is it? Like 6 million go into menopause every year, 6 million women.
So that's a lot of millions and millions of women. Now, what numbers are we at in terms of women that are hormonally optimized? I think, is it under 2% or under 4%?
So you hear all sorts of numbers. So when I was at the North American Menopause Society meeting last year, they said a number of something like 1.2 or 1.4. And then I heard 2%, and then I heard 4%. So I think probably with if you take into account the compounded hormones that are prescribed, that I think it's probably closer to 4%. Yeah.
So we're gonna try to do some podcast math. We should make a podcast math.
No, Alicia. My dad was an accountant, and he was ashamed of my math skills.
It's going to be loose math. But I'm just trying to, so my whole thing with Menopunks, and even just like this moment in time, is I feel like we are in this political position we are in because women have been systemically disempowered. So if we're at under 4% of millions and millions and millions and millions of women, of which the vast majority, like the 96% of women who are in the menopausal range are not hormonally optimized, that means how you felt like you were dying and you could only lie on the couch and maybe make a meal, how I felt, where I thought personally I had probably hip cancer or dysplasia at 47 and a million other symptoms. That means 96% of women feel like shit now at this moment and have been feeling like shit for probably at least 23 years. And that is a lot of women. And if you take that amount of amazing women, because these are women who are in their prime, in theory, if they weren't miserable, they have the kids that are grown, they've in the best part of their career, they have money, they're stable, like they have their shit together, but then everything falls apart. So you look at this horrible political landscape, and then you see that 96% of women are miserable or going through menopause and perimenopause with no medication and no real true alleviation of their symptoms. I think things start to make sense in a really interesting way, and that's kind of my thing. But it's interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like when we first met, I met you in person and Andrea Matsumura, who's Sleep Goddess MD, and Nancy Yen Shipley and Leslie Gottler Sanchez. I met you all at the PDX Menopause Collective, and I was like, who are these babes? I mean, it was a situation. Laura Cuddy, my producer, and I walked in and we're like, oh my God, like what is happening? It's all Wonder Women here. Hormones are cool. What? And Laura is not hormonally optimized because she has a family history of cancer and this, that, and the other. And I am, but even at that time, I had just kind of made the switch from medroxyprogestin acetate to micronized progesterone. So I was feeling immediately so much better. So we just were at this conference and we met you guys and I was like, this is nuts. I think, maybe all of you were wearing this t-shirt that said, was I born with it or is it HRT? Yeah. I mean, it was kind of amazing. So, that I think, and the more people I meet that are optimized sort of versus my friends who are not, it's kind of mind-blowing, the difference. Let's talk a little bit about what the concept of hormonal optimization is, because I use that term because I feel like it's more gender-free. I feel like hormonal optimization or hormone replacement therapy is more gender-fluid and gender-free than, say, MHT, which is menopause hormone therapy. I just think that really sticks it to just the older gals and people with ovaries than everybody. But hormonal optimization for me was game changing. So what is the process of hormonal optimization for people, and like how can they figure out what's right for them?
So, there are some guidelines, and when you're bringing a drug into market, you have to get FDA approval. And so the drug companies will pick something that they really think is going to get past the FDA, and they will use that. And so hormone therapy is FDA approved for the treatment of vasomotor symptoms, which are hot flashes and night sweats, for genitourinary syndrome of menopause, which is a collection of bladder and vaginal and vulval symptoms, and for the prevention of bone loss. So those are all the things that hormone therapy is FDA approved for. We don't have any FDA-approved testosterone for women.
I know about that.
But we do have guidelines, which are all tied to sexual function, unfortunately. I mean, the people who got those guidelines together were amazing, right? There was nothing, and now there are some guidelines which we can use. But
it's so patriarchal, though.
It's so patriarchal that it is tied to sexual function, because who do most women have sex with?
I mean,
in general,
the
the
penises.
vast majority, yeah.
Not all. Lots of women have sex with themselves and
Absolutely.
vagine and many other things, whatever part or things you're into. It's a fluid reality, but it's true. When I found that out, because I also got a prescription for testosterone, and I do want to talk about that later because I have been having a weird experience with it. But I had to I basically had to say that I was having trouble with my
Yes.
libido, and I was, so it was not a lie, but it was specifically tied to sex, and in that realm, like the satisfaction of your partner, which is twisted. So continue, please, because
Yeah.
it gives me the
Well,
creepy-jeebies.
and the fact is that in this world, most women have sex with men, and that's why I find it so patriarchal that it's tied to that. And men do not have to go through the same process. They
How
have
many
5
kinds of
questions.
testosterone do they have?
They have multiple types. And also for the women with the HSDD, hypoactive sexual desire disorder, you're supposed to document in their chart that you've asked these 5 questions. Did you have a sex life you were happy with before now? Do you have a sex life you're not happy with now? Is it distressing you? So you've got to have this documented in your chart in case anyone ever audits you. It's really unfortunate that we hold women to those standards, and all a man has to do is come in and say, I'm having some erectile dysfunction. Nobody asks him, is that with yourself? Is that with a man? Is that with a woman? Is that with somebody else?
Right.
Nobody asks him questions like that. He doesn't have to bare his soul to his doctor like that. So, yeah, it's gross. And I've forgotten the question you asked me, Alicia. Sorry, because I went off on that rant.
I think originally it was hormonal optimization, talking about that and sort of what is hormonal optimization versus HRT, and then how people with ovaries can, advocate for themselves. That's a bigger thing, but also what is it, and then so how do we get it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Okay. So
we're being gaslit out of it a lot, and so those are kind of the things I want to talk about.
Now I remember why I started with the FDA approved, because you will meet a lot of doctors who do have a basic understanding, but stick very closely to any kind of rules or guidelines we have. And so you need to know those as a patient, right? So if you're going to your doctor is going to be looking to see if you have hot flashes, night sweats, any vaginal dryness or urinary problems like repeated urinary infections or having to pee multiple times at night or during the day, or if on your bone density scan you have bone loss. So those are all the things that you can go to your doctor asking for hormone therapy. Now, the patients that I see all come in with brain symptoms. They can't remember their friend's name when they're looking them in the face, and they're depressed and they're anxious and they can't sleep. They've lost their self-confidence. They're anxious. They have no focus, concentration. Everyone thinks they've developed ADHD, and some have ADHD, have never been diagnosed, but their life starts to fall apart when they hit perimenopause because estrogen is very involved in the production and the breakdown or stopping the breakdown of dopamine, right? Yeah. And other women only have the symptoms because they don't have their estrogen. And when you give them their estrogen back, those symptoms all go away. They don't just get better, they go away. Wow. So it's hard to tell unless you treat that woman with hormones, which one she is, or look back in her history to see if she had signs of ADHD as a kid. So if you were going to start hormone therapy, and you're going to a doctor who's not, say, a menopause specialist, or even if they are sometimes, so you go in, you say you're having your hot flashes or your night sweats, and then hopefully they would start you on some estrogen or progesterone or both. Dr. Heather Hirsch kind of drilled it into us, and I do love this approach, that you really should start stacking hormones. So you don't start everything at the one time. You can give the prescriptions, but don't tell somebody to start them all at the one time, because then if you get a side effect, you won't know which one it was, and you'll have to stop both of them, which is a real pain. So depending on the person, I will either start progesterone first or estrogen first. Historically, we give progesterone simply to protect the lining of the uterus, because if you give a woman extra estrogen, you can make the lining of the uterus thicker, because your body thinks you might be going to get pregnant, and it builds up this nice thick lining. That's what happens in your reproductive cycle.
Cozy.
And so the progesterone will help stabilize that and thin it out. So years ago in the 60s, when we were giving women just estrogen, we saw an uptick in uterine cancer. Added in the progesterone, and you don't see that anymore. But now... Yeah, now we know a lot more, and the micronized progesterone is so helpful for women, especially if they have any anxiety or difficulty getting to sleep. But in my mind, at home in Ireland, when you were training, you know, the attendings would rap you on the head and you say, use your head. Use your head. Don't just go by guidelines. You know, anyone can write a guideline. Use your head. And in my head, we have estrogen and progesterone all our lives.
Right.
Why would it be okay to live out the rest of our life with no progesterone and just keep giving estrogen? So for me, you know, and the more I read about it and the more I learn about it too, I think progesterone has a lot of effects and may have an effect on our bones as well.
Yeah, I was watching a video about that today, about progesterone, because everybody's like, well, what does progesterone do? I think I get what estrogen does, but it can help with a lot of things. It can help with bone building. It can help with ADHD. I personally, after I switched from the evil medroxyprogestin acetate, which I didn't even know I thought it was progesterone because it said progesterone, but then my doctor at Kaiser was like, oh, how are you sleeping? And I was like, still not that great. And this is this year in March, right before I started making this film, basically. And she's like, well, why don't we try you on micronized progesterone? And I was like, I'm not on micronized progesterone. I thought I was on. She's like, no. And I was like, well, why did you keep me on it if you knew it was bad? She goes, well, I just went to a lecture and I learned about it. And I was like, oh my God, criminy crackers. So I got on it in March, and I have to tell you, I really think that was the biggest game changer of all, because I was on estradiol, which is bioidentical, but I was on the synthetic progesterone. And then once I was on micronized progesterone, I swear to God, my ADHD symptoms lessened. I have found myself in the flow state of hyperfocus. Thank God, because of the movie. But like in that state, more than I'm scaring myself again, which is great because I used to scare myself. And now I'm like, oh shit, she's back, you know. But I was pinging like a ping pong ball. It was wild. So I really felt like that was a really big one for me. And a lot of people don't really know what the deal is with that. So thanks for explaining that. It's really interesting. So that kind of leads us into the sort of optimization thing. Continue.
Can I tell you just a tiny bit of why that was?
Yeah, please.
So when you swallow that micronized progesterone capsule and it goes through your digestive system, the liver breaks some of it down into something different called allopregnanolone. And that crosses the blood-brain barrier and attaches onto our GABA receptors. And that is where alcohol attaches onto, anxiety medications, sleep medications, they all activate the GABA receptors. And allopregnanolone does that. And so that's why we can try all these other synthetic progestins and they don't get converted to allopregnanolone. And so we don't activate our GABA receptors. So a lot of women think they're on a progesterone like you did. And so you should be getting that effect, and they're not, because it's not the micronized progesterone.
Wow. And it's funny, when we talked to Robert Langer, who is one of the original investigators and researchers on the Women's Health Initiative study, who will be in the film, he mentioned that actually when they started the WHI, they had the option to use micronized progesterone, but for whatever reason, they decided, nope, let's use the medroxyprogestin acetate as well as the equine estrogen, which is horse urine estrogen, versus plant-based bioidentical. It's plant-based, right? The bioidentical, I think that's where it's all derived from.
Yeah, it's all comes from like soy or the yam sweet potato, but it's all synthesized in the lab, you know, really.
Yeah, it's synthesized, but some are sort of from a more natural, some are really chemically based. And so, it's pretty, so I feel like they had the chance to make that study so much, it had so much great promise to change things for the better, and it really ruined everything for so long. But before we tip into that, so when you're trying to hormonally optimize, meaning like you're going to, well, so you're a regular person like me. Like when I went to the doctor 2 years ago to sort of address over 2 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, when I'm 55, so maybe when I was 51, I started getting a lot of symptoms. And I went to my doctor at Kaiser and I was like, I'm suffering. And anxiety, of course, was one of the first things out of my mouth because I didn't understand any of what you just said. I have anxiety and I've had some hot flashes and I'm tired and blah, blah, blah. She's like, well, that's not enough. Like, you're only 51, you're still having your period. So, just stick with it. And, like, you just wait. Let's just wait it out. Let's see how it goes. And so then, of course, it got worse and it got worse. And then my friend's like, well, try black cohosh, try ashwagandha. I tried black cohosh, I tried ashwagandha. And it did feel like it worked for a little while, but also maybe my symptoms just were more intermittent at that point. So it's sort of hard to tell. And then it got so bad and she was still saying no. And I decided, okay, this is ridiculous. I have to take this into my own hands. So I went to Kaiser Telehealth. And I had done a bunch of internet research, just like you, and you were lying on the couch and it was feeding you stuff because you're like, why do I feel so bad? And they're like, maybe it's menopause, maybe it's perimenopause. I got a lot of those videos too. And I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about quality of life because everything I've learned from the internet, sorry, I hate the internet, but I love the internet. We all feel that way.
I know.
Everything I've learned says if you can address, quote, quality of life with your doctor, they have to act on some level because that's really what all doctors are trained to do. So I addressed quality of life. I was like, my quality of life, this is what the telehealth dude, it's like somebody I talked to randomly that I've never been to, but I was like, I don't want to be shut down again by my doctor. So I'm just going to try the random reality of telehealth and just go in strong, come in hot with quality of life and symptoms that I've read about, like what you just talked about, right? The vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, whatever, I can't remember, a brain fog, whatever the sort of approved FDA things were. I said all of those things and they're like, okay. And what do you want? I was like, I would like progesterone. And I was like, okay. And so they then prescribed estradiol and medroxy. He probably didn't know any better, but then my doctor checked in on me and kept it going. So that just kept going for like 2 years. And I felt better, but not entirely better. So for me, optimization really hit this year. I mean, this is just a few months ago. I was feeling much better with the estradiol for sure. Most of my hot flashes were gone, but everything was still messy. And then once I went on to progesterone, it really made a huge difference. So now I feel like I'm optimized. Then I went into the testosterone zone with some of the same issues with like the sexual dysfunction stuff. But I personally have felt like it kind of roided me out a bit too much. So like the amount they tell you to take is kind of a lot. They want you to do a dime-sized amount, this gel that is prescribed for men generally because there is no FDA-approved testosterone treatment for women. And that dime-sized amount, I tried that the first day and I felt like the Hulk, Aoife. I felt like the Hulk. It was not a good Hulk feeling. It was like, oh my God, I've lost my chill feeling. So I backed off. What do you think about, like, in terms of hormonal optimization, like, how do people sort of figure out how amounts are right for them? Like you're kind of prescribed X amount, but that's not always right for everybody. It's sort of like a basic amount. Maybe it's the lowest dose of estradiol and the lowest dose of progesterone and the highest dose of testosterone. Like, I mean, I know it's not going to hurt me necessarily, but I don't want to not feel like myself, you know?
Yeah. I think it's hard for a person to figure that out. I think that's the doctor's job to take all the information they have and guide you about that. Like if I have a woman who's coming off the birth control pill, and going on to hormone therapy, I'm not going to start her on the lowest dose of estrogen or she's going to have horrendous symptoms. You know, one of those birth control pills that she takes every day is probably 3-4 milligrams of oral estradiol.
Oh my gosh. So really?
Yes.
So it's way beyond what we're prescribed for peri.
Way beyond. Yes.
And is that synthetic or
synthetic? Yes.
Synthetic, okay. Wow.
So ethinyl estradiol is way more potent than oral estradiol. Ethinyl estradiol is way more potent than plain oral estradiol.
Oh.
So if I have a person who is 68 and had her last period at 50, I am not going to start her on the highest dose of oral. You know, I'm going to start her on transdermal estradiol, probably the lowest dose patch. And often I'll say to women, you can cut that patch in half or in thirds if you like. It's a matrix patch. So the medication is in the adhesive. So you can cut them. So just totally depends on the person and what's going on for them. And I always say, if possible, start at the lowest dose and just start low and go slow. So for my patients with the testosterone gel, I'd normally say use a pea-size amount. And if you're having any side effects, then cut down to a half a pea-size amount. Like your body is going to tell you what's going on, you know. But a dime is a lot, yeah.
I mean, let me tell you, a dime is a lot. And I have some friends, I will not name any names, but I have one friend who I love dearly, and she started testosterone therapy, and it really was a game changer for her. But she's also doing competitive sports. So she sort of, can get a little intense more than she was. It's like she's definitely lost her chill, right? And for me, my chill is something I love. I like to, with ADHD, with anxiety that's OCD my whole life, all these things that had nothing to do with my hormonal state, but just my general genetic state and stress state. My thing's different, but she really, if she's taking what's on that tube, which is what I got generally prescribed, which was a dime size, it was so beyond for me. I couldn't even, it was nuts. So I went down to a pea size, and now I'm doing like half a pea once a week. Like not even. And I do feel like my libido's back, but that could also be the micronized progesterone. So, it's sort of funny, but for me, I self-titrated a little bit because I was originally at 0.05 or whatever of estradiol. And then I felt the hot flashes come back, and I felt some of the pain come back. So I was like, I'm just going to take another half a thing. And then I felt so much better, and that worked for a while. And I just actually literally sent a message to my doctor on Kaiser, and I was like, hey, I'm just letting you know that I was kind of feeling symptomatic. So I decided to up my own dose to 0.075. Can we change my prescription to that? And, kudos to Kaiser. They're like, we're so glad you found a dose that's working for you, that's alleviating your symptoms. We will absolutely do that. No problem. So they did that for me once. And then recently I upped it again to 1 milligram. And now I feel like I'm where I need to be. And they're like, we're glad you found a dose that works for you. We will change your prescription. And they did that. So I feel like that was really, really cool.
I'm really impressed.
And that's optimization. That's me advocating for myself, with my quality of life being the one thing I'm holding in my hand, and saying, hey, I could feel better. And I'm deciding on my own to make that decision to titrate up, which means take a little bit more. And you can do that with the patch by cutting it transdermally. But, it helped me figure it out, because I didn't want to wait to see my doctor to decide if they want me to take a quarter of a pill more. Like, it's not going to kill me. So if we do that, I'm not saying, I know you're not giving advice per se, but like, if we are kind of deciding on our own to kind of titrate up with our dosage, is that going to hurt us?
So I don't honestly leave that to my patients to have to decide. I say to them, if you notice any of your symptoms coming back, try an extra half a patch or an extra quarter of a patch, and then message me and let me know. And then next time I'm refilling your patch, I'll do it for that dose, which I think is a very difficult for doctors, because we have been trained that we know best. And when you're doing care for ovarian hormones, you have to give all that up and hand it over to your patient and go by what they tell you. So I'm just really impressed that was the response that you got from your doctor. I love it. It makes my heart happy.
Yay,
because we have to trust women. Women are so intuitive. They are so intelligent. They know damn well when something is wrong or right in their body. And we have not been trained to listen to them at all, historically. And so this is something new for us. With the testosterone, I would say we make testosterone in different parts of our body. So our ovaries are one, our adrenal glands are another. And what I often find with my patients is, if I do some baseline blood work at the beginning, say, and I see their testosterone is 7, let's say, and I then start treatment with estrogen and progesterone, what happens is my patient starts to sleep. They start to get more energy. They start to feel better. Their general overall health is much better. They're getting exercise. They're more focused on what they're eating. And naturally, their body starts to make more testosterone then. So often it could be low originally. And then because your body is so much better, you start to actually produce your testosterone a little more anyway,
Wow.
So I usually try to, I hate to say, every woman is different, but in general, I tend to leave testosterone until I really feel like my patient is as good as I can get them on testosterone and estrogen. And then if they're still having some symptoms which make me suspicious for low testosterone, then we add in the testosterone.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I don't, Kaiser was not gunning for me to have anything. So I just decided this is what's going on. But honestly, now that my micronized progesterone's kind of balanced me out, I'm feeling like myself again in a real way. And when I was doing the testosterone every day, I swear to God, like it was roiding me. Like, I just felt like just way more amped up is the best way to describe it. I mean, I did a couple podcasts with people where I was the guest and I was like, oh my God, I'm talking so fast. I mean, and I do talk fast, but I was talking like testosterone fast.
There's an Irish comedian called Deirdre O'Kane. I have to send you her video. Maybe we can link it in the show notes. But it's where she gets her estrogen and her testosterone confused, and she puts on a packet of the estrogen gel, and she tells a little bit about it. Oh, it is so funny. You're making me think of that.
So how long do you think it really takes if a person with ovaries starts exploring hormonal optimization, if they've worked with their doctor or educated their doctor and self-advocated for their quality of life to be improved, and they've started treatment, whether it's one at a time or both at the same time or however they kind of get into it, how long do you think it really takes for people to start to feel better?
So let's talk about progesterone first. That's the anxiety and kind of getting to sleep. Women will say within the first few nights of taking their progesterone that they notice the difference. So that doesn't take long at all. Estrogen-related symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, palpitations, usually gone within 24 to 48 hours.
Wow.
All the other estrogen symptoms, all the brain stuff, usually weeks to a couple of months. And usually if my patient has been on a dose for 8 to 12 weeks and they really feel like they've plateaued, but they're only a certain percentage better, they're 60% better, I'm always aiming for at least 80% better, then I know I need to go up on the dose.
Right. So yeah, for me, I think it was, some of the feelings were immediate. I would say within 48 hours, the hot flashes stopped. But really the thing about my hip, I really thought I was going towards like a hip replacement. And ironically, I have like 3 friends who are going through hip replacements, artists and musicians, and it's, knee replacements. It is crazy. If you're in your 50s and 60s, it's a hot mess out there. But I started, one day I woke up and I was like, I don't feel any hip pain. And this is something that was waking me up 7 times a night. I would wake up from the hip pain. I would turn around because I'm a side sleeper. I'd be like, oh, and then I'd be up and I have to pee. And then I'd go back and then I'd turn over again and I would be up and I'd have to pee. And it just never ended. And I would wake up and I would still be so miserable that I was zapped of all creative juice, of all energy. And it was just exhausting. But then like 6 months in, I woke up and I said to my partner, John, I'm like, I don't feel any more hip pain. What? And that's when this was before I met you, before I got into making this movie specifically, I was just like, this is nuts. That's why this was happening. And nobody explicitly told me, oh, this could be your hip because your collagen is affected and your joints are affected and all these things with estrogen and progesterone. But it was remarkable. And honestly, a big part of why I decided I wanted to make this film, because I couldn't stand up at rock shows. I couldn't stand at practice. I couldn't really, I had to sit on a stool in order to play my synth and sing, which is fine because I am lazy sometimes and it's important to relax while making music and being creative. But it was really distracting to have that much pain. And one of my other participants, Gilly Ann Hanner, who was in the band Calamity Jane in the 90s and now in a band called Desire, in the film we talk about, how she couldn't pick up her bass. She had so much shoulder pain and so much like lower back pain. It was a mess. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we lie down on that couch when we can't get up, but when you're especially someone who identifies with your creative process, which is something that, I 1000% am my creative process. I am the creative process. I eat and I love cats and flowers, but like who I am as an artist is who I am. And so the idea that I was in so much pain and I was dying potentially, or I had hip cancer, or some other thing, brain cancer, brain tumor, all these things that we think we're doing, that really scared me, because just like anything else that we have in our lives that we value, I was like, how am I going to be creative if I feel like that? So 6 months in, I did start seeing a lot of changes. And now even just by changing my progesterone to micronize and then adding in a tiny bit of testosterone, I'm like, what I really realize is, oh, now I know what they're afraid of. Now I see what they're scared of. Because if I can be 55 and not only just the badass I've always been, but with the fucking energy to care more than I've ever cared before, I mean, that's a big deal. Have you watched the I Do Not Care Club? That awesome.
Yes.
So I love Melanie. She is just being Melanie. You should check it out. I'll link her down there. She's the best. She's so funny. But I have to admit that as much as I enjoy the catharsis of her exploding about not caring and just the no fucks given level of perimenopause, I also think it's really like an example of where we are right now, with 96% of all people with ovaries not achieving relief through hormonal optimization, which is the cheapest way to find that relief versus the 8,000 things that can be prescribed to fix your suffering otherwise, right? I mean, so maybe we start the We Care Too Fucking Much Club. What do you think about that?
I love it. I know. I see where she's coming from, and she's really funny. But I understand what you're saying. Like it's time for a change.
It is. I feel like so. If 96, let's continue with our questionable podcast math. If 96% of women or people with ovaries, to non-gender specify, are really like, just are confronted with so much disinformation and gaslighting from their doctors, which is, I think, due to poor training and lack of current education and access to even just the doctors. If 96% of them even went down to 76%, say we added 20% of those millions and millions and millions of women, that's a lot. And remember, when we're talking about the Women's Health Initiative study, it was 40% of perimenopausal and menopausal women that were finding relief from suffering with hormonal optimization in 2002. And then after the release of those results, which were what I found out through my investigation, intentionally skewered, it went down to less than 4%. And I think it just kept rocketing, or it rocketed so fast. It was like a tidal wave of women getting off of HRT when it was a tidal wave of women getting on HRT. And I remember, I should mention, the Golden Girls were involved. So we'll talk about that at a different time. But what if 20% more, if we start to get those numbers back? I mean, do you think that do you think the I Care Too Fucking Much Club might explode?
I really do. I was just, as you were talking, I was trying to remember the statistics for the percentage of women who leave their job during the menopause transition, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. But women leave their job during this time. They leave their relationships during this time. They commit suicide during this time. There's a spike in suicide in women between the ages of 45 and 55. And there was a really interesting article that came out earlier this year from the Department of Defense, I think, where they
Wild.
compared women who had depression and were on hormone therapy to women who had depression and were not on hormone therapy.
Wow.
And there was a massive decrease in the rate of suicide in the women who were on hormones. So we have all this information. It's not like it doesn't exist. We don't have to create the wheel again. Like, it's all there. And the fact that nobody has taught it is just so demoralizing, because women are out there trying to fight this battle on their own. Last year, myself and two of my colleagues did a poster for the North American Menopause Society, and we did an online survey of women. And some of the docs helped us with it, especially Dr. Mary Claire Haver, who posted it on her page. And we got like over 3,000 responses.
Wow.
And our questions were, what is the biggest barrier for you to starting hormone therapy? And, the number one thing that came out was the fear of breast cancer. And very close behind was, I don't want to have to go to my doctor's office and fight my corner for this. I don't have the energy to fight for this. I don't want, it was, all the answers were, I don't want to have to go to battle to get this for myself. It's too hard. I don't have the bandwidth to do that. And so this is a big deal. This is something that in some other first world countries is freely offered to women because there's a nationalized health system, and nobody benefits from the women being sick and tired and depressed at home, leaving the workforce, leaving their marriages. No one benefits from that. So they want to keep women healthy and well and living long, and they don't want to be paying for them to be in nursing homes for the last 20 years of their life. And so these hormone therapy is offered freely, paid for whoever wants it.
I mean, it's the cheapest thing. It's like, it's the fastest solution to relieving suffering versus the like, I mean, how many, can you just like rattle off a bunch of drugs that really came into vogue after HRT got pulled?
Yeah, all the benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax for anxiety, all the sleeping medications, the antidepressants, the SSRIs, and all these drugs are very useful. We use them all the time, but these are the ones that really took off once we took women's hormones away. Statin, cholesterol medications, blood pressure medications, diabetes medications. These are all the things that if you keep your hormones on board, you can really help prevent happening to you, because losing your hormones causes these massive metabolic changes in the body. And so those are all the drugs that really took off after we got rid of hormones.
It's so wild. I mean, those are just the drugs, right? If you think about the industries that developed after women were taken off hormones, like ripped off of hormones, the industries. I mean, there's giant wellness industries about trying to alleviate that suffering. And it's like, it's all just sort of gloss, because you really can't alleviate it without these hormones that your body made. And I get a lot of people saying like, well, it's natural. Like, you just kind of go through it and then you're fine. And I was like, well, what I'm learning is that the truth is that we're living longer than ever before. So most mammals, I think it's almost all mammals except for maybe the whale, and is it the elephant? I can't remember. There's like two. Almost every other species dies before menopause or around menopause. Like they die before they really have to get through it, right? It's just part of their natural life cycle. But we as humans, God bless our souls, have learned how to outlive that, right? So we're living longer, potentially even over half of our lives in perimenopause and menopause, which means that like we're like going through this transition for a long time. And then when we're in menopause, we're literally off a cliff of hormones. And I saw, I think Kelly Casperson in the FDA panel that recently happened, which I'll link to in the podcast, which was mind blowing, though shockingly didn't seem to do as much as I thought it would. But she talked about how thinking about menopause, like proper menopause, when you're a year out from your period, is basically the equivalent to castration. In men, it's the equivalent. It's like you take all the estradiol and all the progesterone and potentially all the testosterone out of your system, you are castrated. Yeah. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree. It is. That's what it feels like for women. The unfortunate part is, I don't know if it would be different if it happened suddenly, but because it happens so slowly, it gets ignored. Yeah. And women start to rationalize it too. Yeah, and a lot of women will go from being pregnant and having a baby into perimenopause. And so it's like I'm not getting any sleep with the baby, or they're looking after their elderly parents, or this work is really stressful. And so we're grieving somebody. And so this is a stage of life where this happens to us, where there's so much else going on that we continually rationalize the symptoms that we're having, and we don't realize it's perimenopause or menopause, which is why your doctor needs to be able to pick up on it for you when you go to them crying, saying there's something wrong with me. I know I'm not depressed, but I'm depressed and my body is falling apart. Your doctor needs to be able to say, I know your brain's not working at the moment and you can't figure this out for yourself. That's what I'm here for. This is perimenopause.
Empathy, what a concept. But also perimenopause, like I did not realize at first that it can start as early as 35. I mean, maybe even earlier, depending on your genetics. Like, what? I mean, that doesn't give us much time not in perimenopause as adults. Like, we get through our hot and bothered 20s and rock bands or whatever, and then we hit our 30s, we're like, we're adults now. And then you have like maybe 5-10 years and to be an adult without being in total misery. And then most people that I know aren't having babies, if they're having children at all, until their mid 30s or even to their mid 40s. Like, that's the range now, because everyone's like, why would I give my life life up completely and my creativity or whatever I love to do in my life, from 20. That's just not the thinking anymore. The thinking is like, live life, figure out who the hell you are, become stable financially, and then maybe meet a partner or do it on your own, whatever your option is. But like, I don't want to be transitional and kind of figuring out what I'm doing when I'm having a child. We all want to really be in a good position to support that. So like we're doing it later. So that means that so many women in their geriatric pregnancies, which is such a fucked up term, let's just be honest, it's so rude. We're not geriatric. Like
Totally.
Most women these days who are having babies, most are above the age of 35. It's not even some, it's got to be most. And they're not geriatric, but they are potentially perimenopausal babies. And that's a real thing. One of my producers, Jana, she had a perimenopausal baby at like 46 and didn't know she could even get pregnant, but was also suffering from symptoms of perimenopause. So I have another friend who had a baby and, right after was just like hit with all this wild autoimmune stuff and all these symptoms. She's like, but I'm only 38. Like what? Like I don't think we're really told that this can start so early that it's going to elude you for years until you are in the pit of despair. And that mental health element, which is something that, is at the core of all that depression and suicide and SSRIs, like people really do not put the mental health element with perimenopause and menopause very often. And it's really too bad because it has to change. It's not even too bad. It must change because when you are sucked dry of what Wolf Etienne, or one of the experts I've talked to called, when they first did studies on estrogen, it was called the happy drug. When you are sucked dry of the happy drug, the thing that helps give you well-being and balance, like really, I mean, it's not you. It's not in your head. It is in your body. It is in your system. Like you are now in a hormone deficient state. It's not an imagination. Even if your doctors are telling you that it's in your imagination, it's not. It's because it's so varied and there are estrogen receptors on every part of the body that we just kind of get gaslit by ourselves on some level. We're like, well, that can't be it. We talk ourselves out of it also because we have such a high tolerance and threshold for pain.
Yeah, that's very true as well.
I mean, it's wild. We're sort of in this thing. And so why do you think that, I mean, you are a doctor and you became radicalized in your process of, having perimenopause and menopause, like two questions, I guess. One, do you feel guilt about the way you treated people before you understood? And two, like, why is it so bad out there, even now, in the year 2025? Why is it so bad?
Oh, I feel so bad for all the women that I missed throughout my career because I had no idea. This is, for a doctor, I feel like this is getting to a point in your career where you learn that, being thirsty and getting up all night to pee and losing weight means you have diabetes. Like, it's like that being left out of your training and having seen hundreds or thousands of people who've had those symptoms and looking back and going, Jesus, I would have been able to diagnose them and help them had I known any of that. So yes, terrible guilt I can still even see faces of patients I'm thinking of who I now know what was wrong with them and that I could have helped them. It's awful. And I think if you talk to any doctors or clinicians in this space, that we all have a similar story to that. It doesn't feel good at all. And how do we change it?
Why is it that way? And then how do we change it? Those are big questions, but even just a little.
Yeah, I mean, it is that way because traditionally, medical schools and residencies and fellowships were built by men for men. So that's part of why it is, right? Even before the Women's Health Initiative study, this was not taught very well. You were depending on a tutor that you had or a mentor to teach you a lot of this stuff. It was a skill as opposed to being in a medical textbook. In the textbook, it's always been your period stop, some hot flashes and night sweats, some vaginal dryness. It gets a paragraph, if even, in a medical textbook.
It's half our lives. It gets a paragraph.
I know. And if you're lucky. And so you were always depending on a mentor or a good teacher to teach you all of this. So really, it needs to start from day one of medical school.
So it has to change at medical school. It
has to change in medical school. Yes, again, because like we were saying before, I feel like with doctors especially, whatever you learn in medical school and residency, you bring that with you throughout your whole career, and you almost have a suspicion of new things that come about after that. And especially if it's something that naturopaths or chiropractors, for instance, have been treating all this time, while doctors haven't known about it or haven't been doing anything about it. And I think that doctors look on that with suspicion than anything that has previously been taken care of by somebody else that's not medically trained. So there's it's like this quagmire of shit. I don't know how we fix it, honestly. It has to be taken seriously. People have to believe it. We have to get past the Women's Health Initiative study. You know, the American Academy of Family Physicians post nothing about menopause. They teach nothing about menopause. Wow. There have been very few articles in all the years. I've been here for 20-something years now. There have been very few articles in the American Academy of Family Physician Journal in all those years. And they posted something a couple of weeks ago that was literally a collection of Fox News sound bites from the WHI 20 years ago. It was written by two doctors, one of whom has spent many years testifying against HRT in court, as an expert witness. So has made HRT. Her living against HRT, yeah. So, and this is what they choose to publish. So with all the information that's out there and all the amazing articles that have come out, like Dr. Jim Simon and Dr. Barbara Levy made that article free, and they had to pay to make that free access last year, explaining the WHI, explaining the other studies, explaining how safe HRT is. And these two write this article saying there are basically no benefits other than protection of bone to giving women back their hormones. And the AAFP chose to publish that. I mean, that enraged me. I didn't even know what to do. I'm halfway through a letter, but I have to keep stepping away from it because I need to make it professional, and I can't be professional at the moment.
So the gaslighting and the misinformation continues. It's not like, hey, everybody, we know the truth and let's move on. I mean, like, we're actively being gaslit.
Yes.
But not only our doctors, but by the professionals who are out there in the societies trying to tell us what's good for us.
Yeah.
What? I mean...
What do you do with that? I don't know. I mean, I'm on quite a few text threads of menopause specialists. And this is like, we eat, breathe, and sleep this. It's so important to us. For us, this is our world. Yeah. And, things like this, you read them and you're devastated after it. Like, you're constantly being pushed back into the past, into the into the past? We gave women hormones in their past. What am I talking about? Like, I
mean, apparently, like when in the past, before the WHI results came out, women would go in complaining of these symptoms. They would be treated just like diabetes or thyroid. Yes. It was like, oh, okay, boop, here you go. Yes. Here's your prescription. It's just another thing that we kind of help you with because this is living, Yeah. So there's still perpetuating so much disinformation, but like, I mean, so my thing, and this is why I really got into making Menopunks the film, was not just, I understand what's happening. And I understand that that it's not true, that actually that there's misleading information, that there were skewed results or that there were misinterpreted results or whatever. But actually, like, my question is why? Why, if that's true, this is just my podcast math again. I think this should just be called Podcast Math with Alicia and Aoife. It's great. But thinking about sort of like the bigger picture and all of these people that have just been like suffering for 23 years and dying and, being miserable, the nursing homes filled with dementia patients who are probably boomers in the literal crosshairs of what happened with the WHI, telling people to get off of hormones, that hormone therapy causes breast cancer. My biggest thing is, why did this happen? And for what reason? Because it sure seems intentional, as I mentioned before, looking at the political landscape now and the lack of women who care in the system trying to change it. I mean, we're there, we're trying, we're doing it, but we are only good for so much if we're not able to feel good and feel ourselves, right? So like, why? I mean, I have my theories as to why, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as to why this happened 23 years ago when the WHI in 1993 was like a game-changing situation for women. 165,000 women were brought in for the first time into a study of that size, of really over even 5,000 women. There were never studies like that. 165,000 women were in the study, and it was going to change things for us. And then it went completely south. Can you just kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's very hard to get an answer from anyone about the exact reason that happened, but I think it was absolutely cold-blooded, and a decision that was made within a small group of people. So if you listen to doctors who were part of that Women's Health Initiative study, you know, they had gone to their meeting, which was a 6-monthly meeting, expecting to kind of snooze through it as usual, and were met by this small writing group who had written a whole article for the media and an article for the journal, the American Medical Journal, and the JAMA, Journal of,
You got
the
it.
American Medical Association. JAMA.
Journal brain fog. No, go on.
I know, journal brain fog. So, you know, that is not what happens in medical studies. Like, they are so careful about everything. Everything is decided beforehand. You have to stick to the plan. It's like being an architect. You know, you design these things beautifully and you have to stick to them, and you have to have a certain number of patients, or else your numbers are not accurate and they're not significant. And so what happened with that meeting was this small writing group had gotten together and made the decision that this entire study would stop, based around what they called a fact saying that the incidence of breast cancer had increased in the group of women taking hormones as opposed to the placebo group. And so this was very out of the ordinary. You don't hear this story about any other study in medicine. So it definitely was so shady, and changed the course of healthcare for women for over 20 years afterwards. I mean, we're still I just told you about what the AAFP published, you know, all based, and they referenced the WHI over and over and over, as if there were no other studies before or after on women and hormones and breast cancer.
So I'm just going to recap that for people that are listening, because it kind of blew my mind when I first found out. And since then, you and I have actually spoken to Dr. Robert Langer, who was one of the original investigators on the Women's Health Initiative study. And the way he tells the story, I mean, I hope to have him on this podcast to just tell it, because it really just exploded my brain. But he was in that room, and they basically brought in a finished report that listed as, you know, took this far-reaching result, which was that, which was an increase in breast cancer that was, quote, non-statistically significant, or almost reached non-statistically significant. I mean, like, this crazy thing. They took these results that were really not all results, but a far-reaching result, brought it to the front, and used that kind of as the focus of the paper that then spoke for the entire study. And then they had no chance to even review the information that was in there. And these researchers and investigators, like, this is their lives. They're working with these women. They're doing all these studies. They're making sure that it's all, like, to the letter, dealt with in a way that it could really change things in the future if they have proper information. But they weren't even given a chance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. They were told under false pretenses that they could make some adjustments to the media release and the journal article. And so they did. They spent a couple of hours over lunch doing those, working frenzied over it, and sent it off with the courier. And the courier came back and said, no, not only is the journal printed, but it's actually in warehouses around the country, ready to be sent out. So that was, you know, very underhanded. So
JAMA, Journal of American Medicine, is like, basically it's locked. These poor researchers and investigators who see this come out, and they're like, you cannot send this to women. You cannot release this to the press, rather. You can't release this because this is misleading. 40% of women in 2002 of the menopausal age were on hormone therapy. That's a lot of women. Remember, we're under 4% now. So 40%, 40. So they were like, if you do this, and this is what Bob told us, like, if you do this, this is going to destroy lives. This is going to kill women. This is going to create suffering through millions and millions of women and families. Like, it's going to just destroy a lot. And basically, that's when they gave them the chance to do those changes. And then that was all a ruse. This Journal of American Medicine, this article was set to go, but even worse than that, they took these results and the core of the JAMA article and they released it to the press first. And so what happened, right? What happened? Do you want to describe what happened when that went down, Aoife?
Yeah, so there was no social media at that stage. So it wasn't like you could just go online and Google this to see if it was accurate medical information. The front page of every newspaper was splashed with breast cancer is increased by 26%, I think, if you use hormone therapy. It was talked about on every single news station.
Wow.
And so doctors panicked and patients panicked, and they were on the phone all day, every day, pulling patients off their hormones because they wanted to get everyone off them if there was any chance that this was true. But it wasn't for another week or two until doctors actually received that physical journal into their hands in the post, in the mail, and were able to read it. And, you know, doctors are great at many things, but not all of us are great at reading journal articles and statistics.
They're a little dry.
Yeah. And so you'll often skip to the results part at the bottom and read that. Yeah. But for the doctors who were good at reading science articles like that and who could read statistics and understood epidemiology, it was very obvious to them that this was smoke and mirrors. Absolute smoke and mirrors. The numbers did not add up. And I think the wording was the numbers of breast cancers almost reached nominal statistical significance.
I mean,
it means nothing. So if your result is not statistically significant, then you pay attention to it and you move on. Something has to be statistically significant for you to write a paper on it, basically, or to make any changes to your massive study involving 160,000 women. So this was not statistically significant. So,
and it wasn't even a hormone study. What was the study for? It's 165,000 women, and they were all over the ages of 50. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the study was to do with the heart. So they wanted to see, they could see clearly from all these observational studies that had been done in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that women who went on hormones during perimenopause or menopause did not seem to be developing heart attacks and strokes, diabetes, fractures, dementia, aging, like women of the same age who weren't on hormones or men of the same age. And so it was generally taken that hormones were very chronic disease preventive, and so that was generally accepted. And so what they wanted to do then was see if you started on hormones later than that, and you'd probably lay down the foundation in your coronary arteries and your brain to increase your risk of heart attack and stroke at that stage, and you started hormones then, could you actually still prevent disease from that point onwards? Could you reverse it, basically? Yeah. And so they didn't want anyone in the study who had menopausal symptoms, so hot flashes and night sweats, for instance, because they knew those women would be able to tell if they were in the placebo group and they would drop out. So they specifically didn't even want women who had any menopausal symptoms.
Oh my God. Wow.
And they wanted older women. So these women were, 60, say, to 79.
Wow.
No, were they?
I think it's 50 to 79,
50
but they were
79.
And the range of results was sort of interesting because they were a little more favorable to the younger ones and much less favorable to the older ones, which are for reasons you can describe maybe.
Yeah. So the women were between age 50 and 79. And then instead of, when they released those findings at the end, when they wanted to stop the study, instead of saying, okay, in women between 50 and 59, where we would normally give hormones, there was no big risks seen. These women did very well. They jumbled everyone together. Everyone from age 50 to everyone to age 79. And they said they had seen this uptick in the incidence of breast cancer. Now, the problem is people quote this trial as a randomized controlled trial of hormones and breast cancer, because a randomized controlled trial is our gold standard trial in science. And that's not what it was. It was a randomized controlled trial for coronary heart disease. Wow. And that's very different, because when you're taking those women in, you're taking history from them and you're documenting things. You're documenting their risk factors for coronary heart disease, some of which overlap with your risk factors for breast cancer, but others don't. You know, so none of those women were stratified for having, say, a mom with breast cancer or a sister with breast cancer. You know, they were stratified based on their risk of coronary heart disease. So people who quote this study as the be all and end all for breast cancer and hormones are so wrong. This is no better than an observational study like the ones we had before the Women's Health Initiative study when it comes to breast cancer.
So so they almost significant, non-statistically, the really, results that were probably women who already smoked, who were 75, who got an incidence of breast cancer, were pulled to the front by this, we won't name names, but specifically by this writing group. And there was a man who was running the WHI. You can look him up. We'll talk about him maybe in another episode. But he specifically was kind of behind that. And we don't know exactly why that was done. I feel like there's obviously a political conspiracy as to why this information, because when it hit the press, it was like hot news. And I think that, everybody was it was sort of this thing where the thing that it was going to save women, right? Like HRT, the question was, okay, it's helping younger women, can it help older women? Like, is this a panacea? Is this the fountain of youth? Basically, was kind of the question. And Congress had allocated close to $1 billion over the course of a decade for this study. It was a lot of money. And when the study began in the early 90s, it was like the age of Clinton. I mean, a lot of things happened with that. And God bless Monica Lewinsky. I think you're such a cool lady. But she went through hell when we were in our 20s. We're about the same age. But that was a different time, right? Hillary Clinton was big. There was a lot of time, a lot of energy towards women and women's empowerment. And on the music side, that was when Riot Girl was really hot and kind of came out of nowhere. And it's when punk broke, when Nirvana became big, and what I think was the democratization of punk, right? Or of music in general, because suddenly it wasn't about how good you were. It was about picking up an instrument and just feeling like you could be included by just doing it. And that's a big difference. So that was the moment in 1993. But 10 years later, in 2002, we just experienced 9/11, right? That just happened. And that was a huge tectonic shift on society in a major way. It was now the Bush #2 era, which is a very different situation, right? So that became a whole different time that was super dark. And I mean, we're kind of seeing echoes now, like on steroids now, or on testosterone, one of them, getting roided out now. But there's a different time in 2002. So, I think in a way it feels like they played upon the fear of the moment, because we were all still reeling from 9/11. I mean, 9/11 happened, and it was a September 1st, right? So, I mean, when these results came out, it was maybe less than 6 months after this. I mean, maybe 9 months. I can't remember the exact month they released, but just putting that into perspective, they came out with this HRT causes breast cancer, and it became like, a line that at least was something they could report about this study. Because what I think you're saying is that for the younger women, it didn't necessarily do anything bad. Maybe it helped them a little bit, but they were already in menopause, right? So it was helping them because they were younger. Maybe their bodies weren't as used to not having estrogen. But then the older ladies, it did not really help that much. It was a mix, depending on how they were treated. So the results were kind of nil. Is that correct? With sort of what WHI?
I think the results were not very exciting. They were expecting maybe some more exciting results. They were being dragged up in front of Congress every few months, being asked, where is this money going? What are your results? Is it worth continuing? And at some point, a decision may have been reached where they said, we have to end this study. How do we end it? And then they had to find a way to end it because Dr. Jacques Rousseau, who was in charge of this writing group and in charge of the Women's Health Initiative study, he was invited to speak at a hospital to a group of doctors after they released the results. And he spoke to them about the Women's Health Initiative study and why they stopped. And there was actually a group of statisticians and epidemiologists in the room. And they said to him, but your results were not statistically significant. So why did you stop this study? This was all smoke and mirrors. What have you done to the future of healthcare for women by doing this? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but when you have a result that you have to reach and you can't get there with the numbers, the statisticians have to leave the room, or the statistical police have to leave the room, I think he said. So he made it clear in that one comment that they had decided the result. The numbers weren't showing that result. And so they said the numbers showed that result. And that was their way of dealing with that. So ever since I heard that, I think it's Dr. Avram Blooming who tells that story, that just blew my mind. Because for me, I had always wondered as well, like, what the hell happened? Was it the drug companies? Because we know they have so much power. I mean, their political power in DC is beyond, right?
Oh, it's insane.
They just throw money at the lobbyists, yeah. So was it that? Was it like some nefarious reason? Because Jacques Rousseau has been quoted as saying, we need to get women off this HRT bandwagon. I don't know what his thinking was behind that, but he's been quoted as saying it. So, and he's in charge then of this study of women and hormones. So you've put a man in charge of a study who has been quoted as saying we have to get women off hormones. So I don't know where we thought this was going to end up, but we ended up where they wanted us to. So yeah, I think it's really murky,
twisted,
and awful, and just makes me want to cry every time I think about it because of the number of women who have the amount of morbidity and mortality in women because of that decision that was made by that group is, I don't know if you could calculate it. Someone tried to, and they came up with a very low number, like 70,000 women died because of this. But I would imagine that number is astronomically higher than that.
No, because how many women died of suicide that they pegged on depression? How many women, died of a hip that they just banked on something else or some other thing? I mean, there's so many elements of estrogen deficiency that affect every single part of our physical well-beings. So I think the misdiagnosis of death and suffering is a big thing too. And I mean, I got to say that now that we're living in an era with things as horrible as Project 2025, which are wildly intentional about decreasing our quality of life, our quality of autonomy, our quality of existence in general, I mean, I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, you and I both are like in the tin hat club now because we're like, no, something went down. Like, and this guy that you mentioned, Jacques Rousseau, he was actually, wasn't he at the recent FDA panel?
He was. There's a photo of him there and heckling the doctors who were on the FDA panel. Now, they were there to say, please take this misleading black box warning of vaginal estrogen. Vaginal estrogen, we have so many studies to show how safe it is in almost all women. And it says on the box that it could cause things like probable dementia. And so that's what these doctors were there fighting for, right?
Can you just hold on? Can you please describe to me how vaginal estrogen could cause dementia? Just what's the creative thinking there?
So that all comes from the Women's Health Initiative study. Everything on that black box warning is based on the combined equine estrogen and medroxyprogesterone acetate that were used. And in the older women, in the Women's Health Initiative study, when you look back, if a woman had some cognitive changes, an older woman, and you gave her hormone therapy, it made them better initially and then made things worse.
Oh, really?
And so that's what seemed to happen with those particular drugs in women who had started developing dementia. And so they slapped that warning on every estrogen product after that. And so even on the estrogen cream, which would be the equivalent of like some 1% hydrocortisone that you rub on a little piece of eczema on your arm, compared to the intravenous steroids you get when you're having an anaphylactic peanut reaction in the emergency room. That's the difference, you know? And so that's what these doctors were there fighting for, gave up their free time for free to fly there to DC and fight for this. And he is there sitting in the audience heckling them.
I mean, wasn't he wearing a button too that says like, I heart WHI?
Do you know who else was in the audience wearing that button? The doctor who wrote that article for the American Academy of Family Physicians. She was also sitting in the audience with that button on.
I mean, what do they have to, I mean, I think I know the answer, but like, I have to ask, like, what do they have to gain by this incredible continual misdirection? Like,
well, he has written paper after paper on the Women's Health Initiative study, right? So his career from that point onwards, so much of it was based on those numbers. And it's very hard to turn around and say, I was wrong. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to just keep getting grant after grant after grant to write, to data mine and get more and more papers out of it. And for her, she had a whole career going to court talking about how dangerous hormone therapy was. Wow. So, you know, these are people whose professional careers kind of were built on saying that hormones were dangerous for women. So they're not going to turn around at any point and say they were wrong or they accept new information or, you know.
Wow. Well, we should, I mean, I kind of want to end with like, how do we counter that misinformation and how do we create the tidal wave of change? Like, one thing I didn't mention was, you know, how they got women into the WHI was with the Golden Girls. They used the Golden Girls to market inclusion and signing up into the WHI right at the end of when the Golden Girls were running. This is like in 1992. It was their last season on the air, and they used the Golden Girls to get 165,000 women signed up. That's so many. And I feel like that Golden Girls effect, in a way, was the Golden Girls vacuum that happened with the WHI results 10 years later, right? So it was this huge tidal wave in reverse of women getting off of hormones. But here we are 23 years later with this incredibly fucked disinformation and misdirection, which Wolf Etienne calls the greatest misdirection in the history of women's health. And he says it's immoral and criminal. And, you know, poor Bob Langer feels like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. He just feels like women have been violated without knowing it for 23 years, which is true. So, you know, what do we do to change it now? Because so much keeps happening, like the FDA panel, and yet, like, I thought that was going to change so much. I was like, this is it. This is them saying everything that I know. Like, you know, they're just putting it out there straight up. Like, testosterone can be taken by women. Hormone therapy does not cause breast cancer. Like, it was as explicit as day. Yet, women are still just as confused. Most of my friends are still suffering. You know, they still don't know what to believe. You know, women think that they can't use vaginal estrogen, so they have like dried up, you know, vages, and they're just miserable. Like, everybody is still confused. So like, what do we need to do? Like, what, I mean, I'll say one thing, which is that like, what I hope to do with Menopunks is to basically, you know, highlight the cost of 23 years of systemic, you know, systematic disempowerment and misinformation about our own health. Like, they've basically taken this thing that could help us and used it against us. So how do we fight back on this larger level?
Well, firstly, if you're listening to this podcast, buy something on the Menopunks website and support us doing this.
I know we want to make a movie and it's all on my credit card.
Yes.
Mention that.
Yes. Funding would be great. I think, you know, doctors are out there. I spend so much of my free time on Instagram making content and talking, and it's completely unpaid. And then people will turn around and say, don't trust these influencers on Instagram. You know, I started medical school. I just turned 19. I'm almost 50. I have so much medical experience. I have learned so much. I have seen so many thousands of patients. I am not an influencer. I am a physician. And one of the ways that I can reach people is through that Instagram account. And it was Dr. Heather Hirsch who got me to set that up. And I will be forever thankful to her because I've met so many amazing people through it. But so you have these doctors who will try to minimize you and put you down and squash the word by calling you, something like an influencer. But I think actually social media is really important in this movement
Especially
because
now.
yes, because this is how women are getting their information.
Absolutely.
And they are they're actually streets ahead of their doctors in many cases in knowing about the symptoms and the treatment of menopause. So I think keep spreading the word on social media. And for all women, every time you're with your girlfriends, make sure they know what's going on. They know symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. Make sure your daughters know it. Often you'll see us all posting about a particular petition we're trying to get signed. We want you to write to the FDA. We want you to write to such and such a senator. And that is all really powerful work as well. So please, when you see something like that, click on it and spend 2 minutes. Take the 2 minutes it takes to do that and sign that petition, or, copy and paste that email and send it, because that is the only way we're going to change things.
Will you ask me why I'm making Menopunks?
Alicia, this is the first episode of your brand new podcast. I think you should tell everyone why you are making Menopunks.
Well, I would like to turn this motherfucking whisper network into a punk rock raging scream. I feel like, knowing what you all know now, which you can't put back in the box about the Golden Girls, and the reverse vacuum of the Golden Girls, and the moment we're in, which was clearly inspired by horrible reality TV, I feel like the only way we can do this in a big way, like in a just massive tidal wave way, is by utilizing the same systems that they use to crush us.
Yes.
And so you have to literally fight fire with fire. And I'm coming at it through music and the creative process, because I think that allows us to really look at A, how high the stakes are in this moment, but in general, but like, holy shit, in this moment. And then B, what was the cost? What was the cost over the past 23 years of like women's emotional, physical, political, creative labor, and what we were denied, or what we couldn't do because we were miserable, right? So like, what was the cost? And I feel like, laying out the truth we just laid out, maybe in a more succinct way to people like, Nico Case, or, I'd love to talk to Patti Smith or Queen Latifah, or, like incredible women who are in their 50s and 60s or 70s and 80s who were in the crosshairs of WHI. Like, I want to find out what they think about that. And I think that Gen X especially, and millennials, we don't like being told what to do, but we're really interested in seeing modeled behavior. Like, we want what she's got, basically. And we don't want it to be Gwyneth Paltrow. We don't want it to be an influencer, not you, not the doctors who are just doing it for free to try to help us one person at a time. But like, there's so many people trying to sell us stuff. And unfortunately, as big as Oprah is, I think her special didn't move the dial for most of the people I know. It did nothing, which I thought, again, oh my God, this is going to change everything. It didn't change anything. Same with the FDA panel. This is going to change everything. It didn't change. So I think that, I'm a music video director and a filmmaker and a photographer, and I've spent a lot of my life helping people make images and art to sort of represent their point of view, and then getting it out there and seen by millions and millions of people. So I'm taking those skills into making a really fun, entertaining, even funny at lots of times, and super punk rock movie where I'm taking the menopause specialist and the punk rockers and fusing them into Menopunks and showing that it's all our fight together. So I think that if we can fight alongside you, you are my friend now and you're my participant in the film, and as well as other doctors from the PDX Menopause Collective and all of my amazing musician friends like Corin Tucker and Gillian Hanner and Jen Spraja, and Kathy Foster. It's such a moment, I think, for us all to take that sort of punk, we do not care, giving no fucks energy, and like focus it in our crosshairs of taking care of ourselves, learning how to self-advocate successfully. And Menopunks, like, I want this movie to help set a new baseline for truth and advocacy, because it's so hard to know who to trust out there. And I know that, like, if I can show sort of the diaspora of Meno people and how we're working on it and how we're all the same and we're all dealing with the same bullshit, that I think that if we can understand that we're not alone and that we are being heard, we can change it together, and we can create an inverse Golden Girls tidal wave of change to really push this over the edge, because it has to stop with Gen X. Things have to change now, and they have to change with us. So Menopunks for the win, Aoife.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much for coming on my very first podcast. You're amazing, and we're going to talk more. So thank you.
My pleasure. I love being part of it. Thanks, Alicia.
Everybody go to menopunks.com. We are available to like and follow on Menopunks on Instagram, Menopunks Film on TikTok, Menopunks on Facebook. I have slutted my way onto every social media platform. I will be an influencer only because I'll take your likes and follows and I will use them to help give you more information. And I will hopefully help elevate the platforms of people like Aoife and the other doctors that I will bring into this, medical professionals and practitioners into this podcast. And I'm hoping that we can really, dive deeper into so many different areas than I could even in the film. Because the film is only, an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and I can put a lot in there. And we're following the optimization journey of a lot of my subjects or participants, which is good as well. But in this podcast, I want to have conversations like this one where I can sort of ask you all the questions that are in my brain and, take all the questions I get through all those platforms people are sending to me directly and find a really great answer to them. So thank you so much for your time. You're just the coolest.
Oh, thanks, Alicia. I think you're the coolest, but fine.
Fangirling. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Are you a Menopunk? For more information about the movie, the Menopunks movement, Menopunks merchandise, and more, go to www.menopunks.com.